a handle around it.
Okay, so your question is how does it work? How does migration of millions of people work
when they're being chased?
When they're being chased, when being pursued. So the first thing is that they actually had a head start. They only began pursuing after a couple of days. But I think there's a much more fundamental question, is that imagine we decided to get all the Jews out of Houston tonight. Right? Jews live all over Houston.
How do you get the word out?
There's 60,000. 60,000 is significantly less than 600,000. Let's imagine that we decide we're going to Utah, right? We're on a pilgrimage to all the Jews, and all the Jews know about it. Let's say we're able to communicate with them all. Right? Assuming we're able to communicate with them all, how are we going to do that? Right? So we view this as being somewhat on the border between a miracle and heavy preparation. The Jews knew for a year already that they're going to be leaving. And like the Torah tells us that the Jews were instructed to be ready to go before the night of the Exodus. Ready, packed suitcases. So everyone knew that they were going. Everyone was packed and ready to go. Yet we're told that the migration and the travels was done in miraculous fashions. We had, like last week's parsha, we had this cloud that cleared the path. We had a fire at night, some pillar of fire. They weren't traveling the kind of way we were traveling. We would think that we were traveling. You know, there was a miraculous element to it as well. So on one hand, it's good preparation. On the other hand, it was somewhat of a miraculous experience. Like we're told, for example, that they were able to traverse great amounts of land very quickly, and that's known as Tfitzat Haderech, which means traveling very quickly. And it's a miracle that happens several times in the Torah. How does that actually work? Interesting, because we'll actually reference something that we mentioned quite briefly in last series. When we talk about, it's on the sheet here, when we talk about God, what we mean is the entity that created, but also creates and recreates. What that means is that we kind of think that we're on an autopilot. Okay, God created me. God created the universe, and that's going to be around until He stops it. Right? So I'm alive until something causes me to die. If, let's say, nothing causes me to die, well, then I'll just live and live and live, in perpetuity. Right? That's the way we view it. In Jewish philosophy, we say, no. Every second that you're alive, it's because God is infusing you with life. And Shana, feel comfortable to come close. Right? So that's a whole different thing. It means God's constantly recreating, renewing. We say that every day God is renewing, recreating the individuals on the planet, but the whole creation, everything that was created at the beginning, is being infused with life, with nourishment, with sustainment. So, if every second God is recreating me, He happens to just recreate me right over here. That's the way nature works. Like nature is God's most common desire, most common will is nature. And then nature is that if I'm sitting in this chair, and now a second later God just recreated me, decided, you know what, Wolby's going to live for, let's give him another second to live. And then, another second, God's constantly infusing me with life. And He happens to just recreate me at the same spot that I was. When we talk about Kfitzat Derech, which is someone traveling to someplace very fast, all it means is that God, every second when God's recreating me, well, He's recreating me in a different place. So hence, I traversed a very long amount of a great distance, but it happens instantaneously. It doesn't mean that anything on the way was just knocked down. It's like I don't know who here has read Harry Potter, but apparition. You read Harry Potter? Apparition means where you just decide you want to be somewhere else, and you're just somewhere else. I'm getting blank stares.
Well, I mean, they were traveling for 40 years. It's in not too big of a space. It is like they were traveling that fast.
Well, yeah, that's true. And like I said, it was on the border of being just nature to preparation. He was asking specifically about at the beginning of the journey, the first 2 weeks of the journey. And we know that the entire 40 years of the Jews being in the wilderness was like weaning them off living on a supernatural plateau. The point is that you're in Egypt, you're being rescued from Egypt in a miraculous fashion. You're being ushered out in, highly unexplained, unanticipated manner. Miracles. Splitting of the sea, getting the Torah, 10 plagues, all those things are miracles. You're just living like in a different, you're not living in a natural setting. That's not the way it happens. Food, it just comes down, manna from the sky. It's a supernatural kind of existence. They're going to go into Israel 40 years later, and they're going to have to maintain the same level of faith, the same level of dedication and commitment, but in a natural setting. So these 40 years are like we're slowly weaning them off their addiction or dependency on a supernatural insight to maintain their faith. So you see, and during these tumultuous, tenuous 40 years, any time there was some little break in supernatural relationship or behavior from God that they got, they start complaining. And that's like a way to test something. You want to test how you're going to respond to certain conditions, right? So you just give yourself a little test and say, okay, let's put myself in those conditions. Am I ready? Am I ready for it? And they stop having for a half a second. They stop being treated with this, with the supernatural kid gloves. Boom, they start complaining. They're not ready for it. So these 40 years is an educational process. It's a acclimation process. It's preparing the Jews to live in Israel in a more of a permanent fashion, without the supernatural relationship that they had with the Almighty at the beginning of this journey, leaving Egypt.
Rabbi, then why was it important to make sure that everybody who was born a slave would die before they actually moved into the Israel proper to start wars and conquests? What's so special about it?
Well, what you're referencing, Vitaly, is that the Torah says is that all the adult men who participated in the golden calf sin, they all died before they left. They went into Israel. There's something about the golden calf, what they were actually thinking and what actually happened there, but something about those people and what they did made it that they are sullied beyond repair in a certain sense. So these are not going to be the people who are going to be building the new frontier of Jewish life in Israel.
So Joshua's army was consisted of men who were born after that.
Well, or men who were less than 20 years old, less than adults. We've used 20 years old as being formalized, a fully mature adult. So, in a certain sense, we look at someone who's bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, 12 or 13, as being a cutoff point for a certain degree of maturity, because that's when they begin their maturity. But they don't complete their maturity until 20. So that's why on certain issues they're not actually held liable for their actions till they're 20 years old.
So it's about the golden calf.
So yes, that's what the Torah says. It says that God made a promise that no one who participated in the golden calf would no adult men. Women didn't participate in it.
It's not about slavery or being...
That's not about slavery. So I would guess that in Egypt they enslaved also the young kids, I would assume. So I'm sure there were some people that were less than 20 at the time of golden calf and actually got into Israel.
Are you saying that no females participated in the golden calf? I'm not clear on that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And that's actually been a pattern in Jewish history, is that whenever the big mistakes that the Jews have committed together as a community, almost always it was the women didn't participate. We look at women, I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but we look at women as being more of the guardians of faith, more as spiritual entities, more spiritually attuned than men. So that's why in many of the sins in the Torah, the women refrained, abstained from participating. There was an example of the sin of Korach in Numbers, where they tried to rebel against Moses and tried to reject his authority, and the Midrash tells a story about some of the compatriots or colleagues of Korach, their wives convinced them out of it. And lots of times in the Torah we see the women as being more spiritual, less prone to sin. So yeah.
That needs to be really broadcast just a little bit louder.
What, really? I thought it's to me it's axiomatic. I mean, it's simple. Like women don't have.
Lost on me, okay?
Huh?
It was lost on me.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I did never know this. But I thought the Golden Calf incident also had women dancing.
Who said it had women dancing? Oh, I think it says that there was an era of promiscuity. That's what it says.
Since the Ten Commandments.
Oh, is that what happened?
Goes down with all the things, and there's golden calf and the whole Jewish tribe.
Yeah, 1956. Cecil B. DeMille. He's the one who's in charge of educating. I'm saying it's that.
I had a question about
Yeah.
your statement about God infuses us with life, so He also decides how long we're going to be here.
Well, absolutely.
So, why is it that so many of the patriarchs and others in the Torah lived very long lives, hundreds of years,
Good medical.
and
Obamacare. Medicare.
essentially no one lives past, average about 85, and irrespective of how.
Do you know what the? Okay, this is a good question, but I would expand your question, because whenever you ask a question, it's important to understand this is not an isolated incident. Let's expand it a little bit. So let's start with some statistics. 2013. Do you know what the global life expectancy is? Global.
51.
56,
No. Buddy.
48.
Global. 70. The global life expectancy 2013 is 70 years. In 1963, which is 50 years ago, the global life expectancy was 60. That's 10 years. That means that every 5 years, global life expectancy is rising by a year, which is remarkable. I heard a statistics that kids born in America today, when they die, the life expectancy will be over 100. So just because we, in a little slice of history that we are privy to, what we think of something being a constant, steady, static, unchanging, it's actually not true. It's always changing. That being said, we see other anomalies that would be inconsistent with the way things are today. Like, for example, we see women giving birth in the Torah at the age of 8. And it is true, you could argue that, hey, even today, the time that women or girls hit puberty is constantly creeping earlier and earlier. Like they say that there's 8-year-old girls that already hit puberty. Like it used to be those 12, 13, 14. So it's like another example of things changing. But we have in Genesis, we have that God is, we have Adam living to 100 and up to 930 years. Well, that's a significant jump. And we see people living hundreds and hundreds of years. And at the end of the first section in Genesis, it says is that God made a change and said, "I'm limiting the amount of life expectancy that someone could possibly have." So the point is, what I want to demonstrate is that the idea of life expectancy and the idea of people having, or people's bodies breaking down, or people's bodies developing, those things weren't always constant over time. And also think about it this way, like, what causes people to die? Their body just starts to break down. Means imagine people didn't have any illness of any sort. Would they still die? Yes or no? They would still die. Why? Because their body starts to just break down. And in 4,000 years ago, who is to say that there was cancer or heart disease, or people much more attuned with nature, and people were much more healthier, and it's possible that people had less illness. Maybe the environment was different. There's a whole list of things that could impact people's life expectancy. So when we see that Jacob lived to 147, that's almost 4,000 years ago. A lot of things could have been different. That could have been standard. Or maybe it was just a little bit longer than it was. Maybe people lived to 120. That was this year, modern days 87. And he lived to 103. And it's possible. So that's the easy way to do it. That's the general idea about life expectancy in ancient times. But I would say in a more specific idea that someone mentioned is that does God decide how long people are going to live? We have a very interesting statement in the Talmud that talks about people have literally life expectancy. And the idea is that someone, when they're created, when they're born, there's a certain amount of time that's allotted to them. And their actions can impact whether or not they actually are able to accomplish or to fulfill that what they have allotted to them. Point being is that they're someone who could sin and get a slice a couple years, you lose a couple years of their life. And we even see today it's a remarkable phenomenon if you actually go to Israel, where the great Torah scholars live. You have dozens of them, right? That 100, 107, 108, 103. These numbers are common. Like the senior Rosh Yeshiva, which is a term for head of a yeshiva, head of a rabbiner, he's 103 years old, or something like that. 103, 104 years old, and is as sharp as a tack. And there's another one a big halachist in Israel, who's I think he's 99, and he swims 4 laps a day. He swims like 40 laps a day. He swims every day, and he's just as fit as you could ever imagine. He was born in the 19 zeros. I don't know what that is, and it's just remarkable. Remarkable. We had there was one guy. He was more of a Kabbalist who lived in Israel. He smoked 3 packs a day of unfiltered cigarettes. 3 packs a day. Okay, his name is Rav Kaduri. You could Google him. Kaduri, Kaduri. And you could tell his mustache was that the people who smoke have the yellow mustache. He lived to 108 years old. And when he died, there were 2 million people by his funeral. Think of 2 million people in Israel, the country that only has 7 or 8 million people. Enormous, enormous funeral, because he was just renowned as a Torah scholar. And his impact was that great. And he lived to 108, smoking 3 packs a day of unfiltered cigarettes. So the point is, this is more of a spiritual angle to your question, that we say that people have a certain amount of their body is built to exist, right? Just provided that there's no illness, but it's going to break down after so many years. And their actions on a spiritual level limits the amount of time that their body could actually have vitality for. And the greater the person, like you brought up the forefathers, those people were on such a high spiritual level, their body did not decay, did not have that spiritual watering down that would negatively impact their body, and they were able to live and maybe today, even today, who made this up that we have to break down by the time we're 100? There's no way to be 100 and not be fit. Who made that up? Why is that so? Why are we so sure that that's actually so? And I think it's remarkable. There's a society, literally a society of great Torah scholars in Israel, and they convene every once in a while. They're like the Supreme Court, so to speak, of Israel, and they don't die, and they just live and live and live and live. All of them over 100. It's outrageous almost. And to me, I look at that as just being, it just being something that's worthy of just, we had a year ago, one of the, Rabbi Eliashiv, his name was, he was 103 when he died. And also, sharp, he still woke up at 5 a.m, gave 30 classes a day, was in this tiny little house in the middle of Jerusalem, answered all the major questions facing in Jewish law all across the globe, but still probably never used the telephone. But, and then he died. And then the newspaper read that the mantle of Jewish leadership has been transmitted to the next generation, headed by Rabbi Steinman, 99. He's the younger generation, and that means the point is that there's people that are renowned for their character, for their scholarship, for their dedication to Jewish continuity, and they seem to buck the trend of everyone just stopping to be, at 70, 80, that's it, you're done. You're in a wheelchair, you're in a nursing home, you have a walker, and your brain just starts to you start to lose it. You start to lose it.
This country's. Sorry, I was going to say this country's obsessed with health.
Yeah.
And the right foods to eat, exercise, and all this stuff so we can control the aging process in our health. And it just sounds like, in the end, the Torah gives the exact fold of mitzvot, study, teach.
Now, the Torah also says you have to be in charge. There's a mitzvah of the Torah to make sure that you have to maintain your health. You have to. And there are people that die young because they don't take care of themselves. And this is another aspect of it where we are partners with God. We mentioned this earlier. We have a say, and our actions impact our lives and the lives of people around us.
You gave the example. The guy smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day.
Well, that could be an exception. Yeah, but it's literally smoked 3 packs of envelope, and somehow he was able to just overcome that. Doesn't mean that, and it's possible that someone who could have lived for much longer, but because he was just not taking care of himself and not taking care of him or herself, then they died prematurely.
So, how would one account for Stalin or Mao Zedong living such a long life?
Sometimes you get born with genetics also, and I think because in Judaism a lot of times so many people, they're marrying within certain circles,
Mm-hmm.
And I remember seeing this one, it was a community in Russia. They were somewhere high in the mountains, took baths in an ice cold stream every day and took a shot of vodka every day or two, and these people were commonly living to be over 100.
Mm-hmm.
So they were looking at why these people, and I think a lot of it had to do with the way they lived, the isolation, but also they grew their own food, they processed everything themselves.
And like you said, it's also genetics as well.
And genetic, because they were all small community and kept the gene pool relatively small. So that may be another.
Mm-hmm. And before I address your question, I want to also say another point, which I just thought of again. There's another story in the Talmud about you remember the book of Samuel, meet a fellow by the name of Eli, and his children, and they were cursed with having short lives. And the Talmud tells us that years later there were 2 descendants of this fellow Eli, and they both merited to live, to so to speak, hold that punishment in check. And they were able to live. One of them lived till 40, one of them lived till 60. The one who lived till 40 is because he engaged in Torah. And the Torah lengthened his life. The other one engaged in Torah and in kindness, so that it lengthened his life till 60. Point being is that we said that good character is able to preserve the allotted amount of time that someone was given. It's possible that not only does it preserve, it also lengthens. It's possible that if my positive action, not only does it prevent me from losing that which I was naturally given, right, or allotment that I was assigned to at the beginning of my life, but it also is able to lengthen it. Now, your question as to Stalin and Hitler and all the terrible people that are given, free reign and long life. First of all, do we know for sure that these people actually lived out their lives? We don't know.
That their lives long enough to.
Well, to do what they do. So that's really the question. How come people are able to do bad things? And this is, once again, why bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people is also a very important discussion. Maybe we'll have a dedicated class for that. But this is just that's the nature of free will, is that people are allowed, are entitled, are given license to do bad. And they're allowed to do things which are wrong, which are hurtful, which are harmful, which take their spiritual life and their spiritual level and the world's spiritual life and spiritual level and even physical level. And it just brings it down. Right? That's the very nature of man. We'll get to this today in the core discussion. The very nature of man is that man was entitled, man is given a license to do what he wants. And it could be wonderful things like building hospitals and saving humanity, right? Or it could be terrible things like genocide. That's the nature of man.
So when obviously God has chosen to intervene at certain points,
Yeah.
and interject Himself and part the seas and create miracles, and He can do that, and we've seen that in the text. Where is He, or where has He shown Himself? Accepting the free will. Where has He shown Himself to prevent or minimize the evil in the world that's occurred, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, yesterday afternoon? If He is all powerful, when, if at all, does He decide to interact and prevent or minimize that sort of damage?
Okay, so there's really two questions in your question. Question number one is about miracles in general, like when does God decide to do miracles and when does God not decide to not do miracles? And also the question is active versus passive miracles, like preventative versus trying to achieve something. So we view miracles as being, some of them being hidden miracles, some of them being revealed miracles, like public miracles, public and private miracles. What does that mean? That means is that, do you know that in your body there are more pipes in the form of arteries and veins than there are miles of streets in the universe, in the world? There is. Remarkable. Like in every one of our bodies, there's enough pipes. Just you string it out, more than all the streets in the entire world. The United States and Houston and Canada and China and everywhere, Europe, everywhere, and there's almost never a blockage. And if there was a single blockage, well, that's a blood clot, and you would suffer tremendously. We view that as a miracle. Think about it. Think about trying to develop a system that there's never any traffic in any city across the globe. Could you try to do that? Would that be a miracle? It happens every day to billions of people. The point is that it's a miracle, but we take it for granted. Take it for granted. The list, we could say a list, like your liver is not a miracle. Of course your liver is a miracle. Like, the scientists have isolated 500 distinct uses for you're drinking a coffee right now. If you didn't have a liver, you'd be dead after one sip of coffee because it can't contain enough toxins to kill you. But your liver is a miracle. And it just makes you able to just filter. It's the greatest filtration system known to man. Or nothing that we could ever even try to do gets anywhere close to the amount of filtration that's able to do, that your liver is able to do. And these are things that we take for granted. And the nervous system and your body is just miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle. But these are, we call them quote unquote hidden miracles because they're obscured by the idea of nature. It happens to everyone. Right? Any parent would know that the idea of procreation is a miracle. The idea you could just make a child and a tiny little cell and somehow that just turns into a child, it's outrageous. That's a miracle. You eat an apple and it's beautiful, appealing, gorgeous on the outside, and you taste delicious, and it's a perfect blend of solid and liquid, and then you finish it and you get a coupon for another one, you throw it into the ground, and trees growing out of the ground. Those things are miracles. The ground's able to suck up nutrients to make fruits. Try to eat dirt. Right? Go outside and try to eat it. You can't. Right? But God made a miracle that you take a little leftover from your apple, you chuck it outside, and before you know it, you have a tree with more fruits that you could eat. That's a miracle. But that's a hidden miracle. And those things are obscured by the idea of nature. Whoa, it happens all the time. It's not out of the ordinary. Imagine if you never saw something like that. Right? Imagine if you try to imagine living life without that. Try living without liquid water. Or try to imagine human habitation. If the sun wasn't exactly 93 million miles away from us, it was a few hundred miles closer or a few hundred miles further away, well, we'd either be toast or we'd be icicles. And without the wind pattern to be able to take the clouds and take precipitation and move it to Colorado, right? We'd all be toast. So you could only live on the coastlines. There's so many things that are just miracles right in front of our faces. But those are hard to see because we're used to them. Because we were wearing the sunglasses that just make, this is just life. This is earth. This is nature. This is just, right? God is everywhere, but it's hard to see it. Those are hidden miracles. And part of our responsibility is to make sure that we don't just take things for granted and we start appreciating everything that God does for us. And we could spend literally 16 classes talking about all the different things that God does for us in our bodies, in nature, in the atmosphere, in society, with our intelligence, with our fingers that bend, right? Imagine if your fingers were like this. Try driving a car with your fingers like that. Try moving, shifting, right? We were created with such design, such perfection, such wisdom, such insight, such perfect. Miracle after miracle after miracle. That's a hidden miracle. And our job is still to try to, squeeze inspiration out of hidden miracles as well. Every once in a while, we have a revealed miracle. A miracle where God changes the course of nature. God splits the sea. Right? God sends manna from heaven. Right? God turns the water into blood. For God, it's as easy to do that, to have water be blood or water be water. It's the same thing. It's no different. To have gravity work or to have gravity suspended, it's the same thing. But to us, because we're used to nature, to us it's a shock. And to us, that's when we finally have a recognition of it must be that nature is not just set in stone. It must be that God actually controls nature. And that takes maybe all the hidden miracles and makes those things more insightful, more inspirational to us. Because suddenly we see a suspension of nature. Oh, it must be that God's in control. So your question was, well, how come we don't have that more often? Or how come God doesn't get involved in preventative methods? And that only happens in select times for select reasons. Like it happened many times, Jews leaving Egypt. Why did it happen then? Because it was important for Jews to know with absolute clarity, right? God controls the world. God controls nature. God is the only one who's in charge. Hence, at the formation of the nation, it's very important for this principle to be ironclad. That's why throughout the course of Egypt and the plagues and leaving and the revelation at Sinai, where every single individual experienced prophecy at the greatest level, it was important to have that to start the nation. We had that. We have documentation of that. That is a historical fact which is incontrovertible. And that alone is enough to suffice for us today to have complete faith. by us referencing back to those miracles. There's no way. Someone mentioned there was at least 2 million people. There's no way to falsify that claim. Think about it. Imagine that thing didn't happen the way it was described in the Torah. Imagine it didn't happen. How would you sell it to a nation that it happened? There's no way to do it. All other religions, every religion starts the same way. Take off the shirt, the jacket. All religions start the same way. Every single religion starts the same way. There's a prophet. He claims to have a revelation, to have a prophecy, communicate with God. Then he says, you got instructions, and he convinces the followers. That's how Islam started. Muhammad, right, says he had a prophecy, he had a revelation. He writes down the instructions in the Quran, and he convinces the followers. And then they go on a killing spree throughout Arabia. Right? That's what happened. Christianity, same thing. Mormonism, same thing, right? Joseph Smith, he claims to have this revelation. He gets the golden tablets. They're written in a Reformed Egyptian, right? No one's seen the tablets, but he claims that right? No one's heard of a Reformed Egyptian, but he, right? And then he convinces people to follow him, and he gets his followers, and they go to Utah, right? So that's how Mormonism starts. Every religion starts the same way. Our religion also started the same way. There's a revelation, prophecy, instruction. There's only one difference between the way our religion was started and the way other religions were started. Our religion, the prophecy, the revelation, the initial insight that started the start of the religion was in a public forum. It wasn't one man. It wasn't just Muhammad or Joseph Smith or Paul on the way to Damascus. It was millions of people. Now,
wait a second. You're saying Judaism started upon the Exodus? I thought
well,
Jews before that.
No, we weren't Jews. We were Hebrews. We were a family. We were a tribe. We were destined to be a nation. We weren't a nation. The formation of the nation was the Exodus, but beginning with the plagues and culminating with the revelation at Sinai.
So what did we believe at the time?
What did we believe at the time?
Before.
Well, we know that the Jews were, on a certain degree, almost indistinguishable in practice from the Egyptians. Idolaters, pagans, like all the people were at those times.
So that's when monotheism was introduced.
Well, no, we had Abraham was already a few hundred years before that. Abraham, it was his family. He had spawned this idea, this monotheism, and it was perpetuated by his kids. But then they went to Egypt. They were influenced a lot by the Egyptians, and in a certain sense, when they left Egypt, they were almost indistinguishable in practice from the Egyptians. And yes, and then they were, sort of speak, redeemed in miraculous fashion at Sinai. Every single person, we said there was 603,500 adult males between the age of 20 and 60. We can safely surmise there's an equal amount of females, lots of kids. There's 1.5 million, 2 million people. Some people say 3 million. I say, let's be conservative, 1.5 million people. Yeah. 1.5 million people, all of them experienced prophecy. That's the claim. And our claim can be viewed, or should be viewed, the same way that Muhammad's claim, and Joseph Smith's claim, and Paul's claim, and every other religion's claim. There's only one difference. Ours is impossible to falsify. Theirs is very easy to falsify. Right? If I come here next week and I say, I had a dream, I had a prophecy, and God told me that you're the chosen one, and you're the one who's going to bring salvation, and you're going to the one, and these are the instructions, right? Everyone should wear Nike shoes, and everyone should I give a bunch of lists, we write a book, and then we start a new religion, right? You know, if that's how countless religions starts. What's the first question you should ask me what's the first question that should be asked to me to make sure to verify that I'm not lying?
Can anyone else validate that?
How do we know you're not lying? Right? You're claiming that we have no direct evidence. Right? It's my word, and you guys are either have to accept it or deny it. And that's what Islam is. In Islam, it's possible that Muhammad's right. Maybe yes, maybe no. Well, it's his word, and no one else could corroborate that. In Judaism, we're the only religion that started with a national revelation. Because if we're the real religion, then it has to be that it's distinct, it's different, it's incontrovertible. There's no way to falsify it. It's not possible. Imagine it didn't happen. Let's imagine it didn't happen. We know the Jews have believed for thousands of years that it happened. We know that 2,200 years ago, the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Torah, was already in Gentiles' hands. And at that point, the Jews were ready for hundreds of years, following tenaciously the book of the Torah. And they were a distinct community. We know that. So there's obviously been millions of people for thousands of years that have believed this story, this narrative, the Torah. How did that begin? If it began in any other way than the way it was described in the Torah, there's no way that anyone would have accepted it. Imagine I told you guys, imagine I came in next Sunday and I said, you know what, you guys, you all had the prophecy. It wasn't just me, it was all of us together. We all had it was a group prophecy. What would you guys say? Well, I didn't have it. I'm out, right? This guy's obviously a charlatan. This is a fraud. I'm out. There's no way you would dedicate your life to me and my new religion.
Well,
now, the Jews were told, you all saw at Sinai. And they all agreed, and they all adopted, and they all taught it to their kids, and it's the nation, and it's been uninterrupted from now, there's been an uninterrupted link of Jewish life, of Jewish practice, of Jewish teaching, of father to son transmission of Jewish values, ideals, Torah. How did it start if it wasn't true?
my religion, right? I'm just a devil's advocate.
Yes.
Heavily based on solar eclipses. Everybody could observe solar eclipse. There's no doubt about that. It's done because of God, whatever I cannot pronounce it. The name of God. It's too many syllables there. Surely everybody sees it. Everybody believes it. When you gather around the pyramid in Yucatan and observe the eclipse as predicted by the priest who would be a prophet in our terms, right? So that's one of the
Ancient astrology. We typically think of the ancients as being less sophisticated than we are, and maybe to a certain degree that's actually true. But we have in the Torah, in books written thousands of years ago, we have to the second the length of a lunar month. To the second. Literally to the second. Something that science only recently had actually come with the very sophisticated models come to actually to realization of the veracity of that claim. Can you imagine to the second? 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, 3 seconds. We have that. The point is that ancient astrology was indeed very sophisticated, and it's possible that some guy knew when the solar eclipse was. How is that at all a proof? Plus, that's not prophecy. To predict the solar eclipse is not prophecy. To have prophecy. Prophecy is a temporary suspension of physical tools and adopting spiritual tools to have a experiential relationship of God. Those things are not. No one has done that. And you know what the Torah even says? This is astounding. Torah says like this: Not only are you the only nation that has had this kind of prophecy and prophetic experience, you're the only nation that has even made a claim to it. It means the Torah is making a prediction that not only are the Jews the only ones to have it, no one else will even claim to have it. And it's pretty astounding with the 46 some odd thousand religions out there and cults and different groups of belief in some sort of deity and some sort of tenets of practice. And we're the only ones that even have such a claim. Why do we the only ones that have such a claim? Because we're the only ones that actually had this. And if you haven't had this, you can't claim it. Because the second you claim that someone else had something they didn't have, you're laughed away.
There's no way to hold a conspiracy with 3 people, much less a million, and then follow a set of laws that's very restrictive.
Exactly.
Who would want to do that if you knew you were all in an own conspiracy and it was all made up?
Yeah, and just try to let's try to rewind the clock to the beginning of the religion, right? Moses, the charlatan. Let's play devil's advocate. He convinces the people that they experienced prophecy. And now he says, it's not true. They haven't seen it. Once again, playing devil's advocate here. And he tells them, you know what? If you light a fire on Shabbat, I'm going to put you down. Which is what he says. Would anyone in their right mind be willing to actually do something like that and dispense judgment like that based on this charlatan who they clearly know is lying? Of course not. Even if he was as charismatic, the most charismatic person in the world. You can't convince me of something that I saw if I hadn't seen it. And especially if compounded with that, if you're going to make me do very restrictive things, if you're going to make my land lie fallow for the 7th year, right? Torah says, on the 7th year, land lies fallow, and everyone takes a year off. But how are you going to feed yourself? Right? Hunter-gatherer, how are you going to feed yourself without tending to your land? Well, God will give you a bumper crop in the 6th year. Unless you're absolutely sure that this guy is not a charlatan, that this guy's telling you the truth, you wouldn't go with that. You wouldn't say, I'm closing my business, God will provide the 6th year double. No one would do that.
There's no question that any founder of religion has the greatest charisma, magnetic personality.
Well, Moses did. Moses didn't.
Yeah.
Moses had a lisp.
And if he
Moses had a lisp.
If he's successful, you would become Moses, you would become Buddha, you would become Muhammad. If you're not successful, you'd be called a cult, and you would become Jim Johnsons and David Koreshans of this world, right? But what I'm saying, I think for most religions, what is sufficient, necessary, and sufficient at the same time, as mathematicians say, is to have a founder who would just be utterly convinced and is able to convince. In other words, I don't think, well, it's a great idea that, yes, we have this 1.5 million people who would observe and see this prophecy at the same time. It's not really necessary for it to start a religion.
Yes, but that's the religion that we have. And that point alone, that claim alone, is enough to assure us of the validity. And that's why, getting back to the original question, the 2 kinds of miracles, those kind of miracles only happen every once in a while.
Do we think
because those kind of miracles are? Let's imagine. Let's stop. I mentioned this a little earlier. Let's stop for a second. Your question is why does God then have more obvious miracles every once in a while? God should assert himself. And you know what? Let's imagine a world where every time someone committed a transgression against the Torah, against God's will, boom, they got a zap, right? As if they stuck the finger into the outlet, right? Or any time someone someone did a mitzvah, they just automatically just felt this like injection of illicit narcotics, just a high, right? Well, then it would take. Then there's no point of it. Remember, the only reason why there's any value to doing mitzvahs is because it's contingent on faith, and therefore the second there's no room for rejection of it, the second there's no slightest bit of doubt, right? What if right away after you did a transgression, you got a slap in the face? Well, no one would transgress, and then therefore there's no value of maintaining the Torah, of doing what's right, because no one wants to get hit. So therefore, God wants our good deeds to have value, right? And our good deeds can only have value if the existence of God in a real sense was somewhat up in the air.
So that's
So it has to be that it's intellectually sound, but still there's still room to doubt, and there's always going to be room to doubt.
so it supports the position, does it not? If there hasn't been any revealed miracles since the Torah, and we accept
Well,
that
there have, but on a national level, no. But there have been. We have documentation of.
so doesn't that
We have stories of people being able to resuscitate dead people, like near-death experiences. The guy died yesterday, and the guy was able to pray and be able to. Right, Elijah was able to do. Well, Elijah's a good example. He was able to do miracles in a public fashion. Yes, there are some, but not.
So I take your point about if you got a shock every time you transgressed, nothing would arguably have much meaning, right?
Mm-hmm.
But doesn't that wouldn't that support the position that the universe is God's creation and man and its intellect is certainly a miracle, and that God spun us out, and then after that it's just hands off with respect to free will? We have to use our intellect, which is a miracle, to prevent bad things from happening. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. Our intellect was not successful enough. If our intellect is a miracle, our intellect was not successful in preventing some of the greatest tyrants of history, but some people's intellect was responsible in preventing other evil from happening, but that God's presence on a day-to-day basis, we don't really see it. It's all
Well,
us.
remember that's what we said earlier. Those are examples of hidden miracles.
Right.
It's there.
Our intellect, our reasoning, using that which is a miracle, which was given us to God, but by God, but that He does not do anything to intervene any longer. Unless
on very select occasions, which you're right. I would agree to means it's a very fine line here by saying God doesn't intervene or God's wet for coffee. Means if you say that God doesn't care anymore, right? Or God's not involved at all, well, then you're saying that God created but left. And that's Jewish faith would necessitate that we believe that God is still involved. That being said, it might be a very, 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 very much a point which is very important to get it clear because it's a little bit of a fine distinction. We're allowed to say that God gives man, like I said, license to do whatever he wants. And we'll hopefully what I had planned to talk about was very much about this point. But God enables man to do as he wishes. God enables man to do genocide. God enables man to do good. God enables man to do murder, rape, pillage. Right? We have a license. That's the definition of man, is that he's allowed to do free choice, and that's the purpose of the world. Is that man is, like you said, spun out to do as he pleases, and hopefully using his intellect. We're the ones that have intellect are able to make decisions to hopefully come to the proper recognitions. And he's presented in an arena where he's going to be presented with free will challenges, and hopefully he will be able to weigh the options and intellectually using his power of intellect and the Torah to guide him to the proper way. But he could choose whatever he wants. So on one hand, it's important to say that no, God's still involved. We only live, in the good grace of God, and He's, like we said at the beginning, He's infusing us with life, and He's involved with the world on an ongoing basis. Yet the idea of free will means that there's some area where people are independent of God. Because we're able to make decisions, even if those decisions are ones that He would not agree with, right? Because otherwise there's no purpose in creation. If man does not have free will, there's no purpose of creation. The whole purpose of creation is that man should be able, with his free will, to choose the right way to live and the right ideals to have and the right things to do. So this is why it's important to make the distinction. On one hand, God is involved with us. God hasn't gone off and spun us out and just moved on to other bigger and better things. On the other hand, the definition of free will is that this is some area of our life that we are independent from God and we're able to make decisions, and He does not, almost never He doesn't almost ever tamper with that. That being said, there are some exceptions. We had Pharaoh, and God hardened Pharaoh's heart. So Maimonides makes a big deal out of this, that this is an example where Pharaoh's ability to choose was suspended. He did not have free choice anymore. For certain purposes, because God wanted to do something very specific, He withdrew Pharaoh's ability to choose one way or the other. He hardened his heart, He gave him no choice. So yes, for certain instances, when the conditions warrant, when God wants to achieve a certain end, that's part of the grand plan that He has for humanity, for mankind, for the Jewish people, then He's going to ensure that something's happened, and that might be a suspension of free will.
So how come, there's portions of the Torah where revealed miracles have happened, and unquestionably innocents are slaughtered, right? When God floods the earth for Noah, everyone dies except for Noah and his family. When God puts the plagues on all of the Egyptians, there's many of the Egyptians are died. They're not all of them are responsible for enslaving the Hebrews. So why did not God at various points, the Holocaust being the perfect example, decide, that's enough. I got to put a stop to this. I'm going to strike Hitler down, or I'm going to strike his henchmen down. This is going on far enough, where you have people that were clearly had blood on their hands, and there wasn't a revealed miracle to prevent or mitigate that harm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with the Egyptians, there was this theory out there of collective guilt. That's why every Egyptian family's firstborn was harmed.
Yeah, but let's assume that might be correct. But let's assume that there wasn't collective guilt. The Holocaust is a good example. I was gonna mention that if you weren't going to mention that yourself. So there's a few things here. First of all, we have the idea of the second there is a Talmud tells us that there are certain times where God makes a certain decision or something has to happen, like I said, God's grand scheme, grand plan, master plan, and the nature of it is that once a certain force is unleashed, there are times where that force wouldn't distinguish between the guilty and the innocent. For example, we had, back to the Exodus, if you remember, it says that the Jews, they slaughter the sheep, they take some of the blood and they put it on the doorposts. Remember that part? Right? And the Torah says is that you put it on the doorpost so that way, when the angel comes and smites the Egyptians' firstborn, he won't come after you. What do you mean? After us? We're the Jews. We're the ones you're trying to save. So the Talmud says that there's a certain idea that once something has changed, that necessitates a certain, a different kind of influence from God into people or into the Egyptians. It's possible for some, because this was a force that was unleashed. It's possible for some innocents to get caught up in it as well. And I think the Holocaust is a great example. Obviously, the cause of the Holocaust, whatever that is, right? We mentioned this. We talked about this, right? The Holocaust was God's handiwork. It was we don't know for sure why, but we could use the Torah to maybe have a very educated guess why, as of why. And many times bad things have happened to the Jewish people, And lots of times there were lots of innocents that were caught up in it. And I'll give you the source for this because you asked this question. Look at the Talmud in 55a of Shabbos, Tractate Shabbos. It gives a story between the angel of death. What angel of death means, a separate discussion. But this force that is having a discussion with God. God wants to, has to do something out of the ordinary, and this will be a plague, and people are going to die, and it says that the angel says, okay, well, let's put black dots and red dots on the foreheads of the people that should be killed and should not be killed. Who are the innocents, and who are the people that don't deserve to be killed, who are the people who do deserve to be killed? Black dots and red dots. So the question's asked, wait a minute, what about the people that weren't responsible for the cause of this plague, but they maybe could have prevented it by influencing their neighbors? So what it says is that, so that argument was accepted, and even the innocents had the red dot put on their forehead, and they were eliminated as well. Point being is that culpability for negative situations that cause plagues is also sometimes given to people that have no part and participation in those activities that brought about those plagues. But if you could have done something to prevent something, we view you as being causative for that thing as well. So this might do a little bit to help us expand this pool of people that may have contributed to whatever it was that needed to be changed with that action, that godly action. So this is not, obviously, it's very much an uncomfortable thing to hear. I know. It's very unsettling. But whenever, how could you say that? It sounds insensitive. I know. That's why it's purely for philosophical. This is a purely philosophical conversation.
You just mentioned two reasons. One is
So
contributory culpability.
Well, that's this one.
Yeah,
That's
but
essential.
You also said, unless it's also good to remember when you made this example of angel of death. So when this pure, unadulterated evil is unleashed, then it's next to impossible to stop it, even for God.
Well, is it impossible for God to stop it? Of course not. But
He will not be willing to do that.
and we have also.
Once Hitler was unleashed, or Genghis Khan was unleashed into this world. And it's not only Jews who were.
Remember, we have in Stone, in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? That's another example of a society that was acting in such a perverted manner that they were treated, very harshly. Yet we have Lot being extracted. Remember that story? Lot, the brother-in-law of Abraham, brother-in-law or cousin, it's not so clear, but he was extracted. And this is an example of when, for whatever reason, it was deemed that he should be granted this specialized supervision and be extracted because he wasn't part and parcel with the activities of his neighbors. Yet, it talks about his sons-in-law. If you remember, we're in Genesis, probably 15 or 16. His sons-in-law were also there, and he tried to get them out also, and they said, "No, we're staying." They stayed, and they went down with Sodom and Gomorrah. Point is that it's possible for someone to be innocent and be worthy of extraction, but if they don't actually take up on that, then they might go down as well with the city. So this is we just gave three different examples of how either individualized people who should not go down anyhow, or how they're actually extracted. So I hope that, but remember, it's a very unsettling thing. The idea of God changing the way he's dealing with people and letting Hitler. And you know what? There's books written about how many assassination attempts there were on Hitler. It's outrageous how many assassination attempts there were on him. And so many things had to fall into place for him to actually be successful. And it already started with World War I and the status of the nation, the League of Nations, and the Treaty of Versailles, and the he was put in prison, and his book, and just this meteoric ascension of this madman, and to convince the most sophisticated nation in Europe to go on a path of genocide. It's how many different things had to fall into place, and the Americans had to sit idle because they weren't part of the League of Nations, and they had their every year they signed an act of neutrality, and the appeasement, and no one wanted to start up with the Germans. It's and then the Molotov-Ribbentrop pact, and Hitler almost did succeed. He was this close to succeeding. And what God said is that this has to change. Jewish life in Europe is done. 1,000 years the Jews have flourished in Europe. They're at the point now. How are we doing there? They're at the point now that if we don't stop it, Jews will disappear. I'm going to let Hitler do it, but I'm not quite going to let him finish. And there will be wholesale slaughter of Jews, and it's terrible. It's a disaster. But this is God intervening. And it's the most unlikely of things that have happened. And it happened, and you know what? People always say that, where was God during the Holocaust? He was there. And he was there, and he was involved, but it wasn't positive. It wasn't positively involved. There were so many, quote-unquote, reverse miracles that actually enabled this to happen.
So we just don't understand. I have to reconcile it in a couple of different ways. Either the human intellect that he gave us, right, which is a miracle, was not sufficient for those people that opposed the Holocaust or whatever terrible event was to prevent it, or to minimize the losses that ultimately,
or to prevent the causes of it,
or that it's in God's plan, which we don't understand yet, that all these Jews had to die.
We have a very good guess. I mentioned there's a very good guess that we have as to why the Holocaust happened. We don't know for sure, but we could give a very good guess. And remember, this is the most uncomfortable conversation that any of us have ever had. I know.
The Inquisition, Russian pogroms, the Holocaust.
Chmielnicki.
We just don't understand. It's from Ukraine. We just don't understand.
1648, 1649, Chmielnicki, he slaughtered countless towns. Hundreds of thousands of Jews he slaughtered.
These were God's plans, and we didn't have the intellect that we were given by him to overcome these or prevent them or mitigate them. And there's just some scheme here that God has that we don't understand at this point.
But remember, we have the Torah, and the Torah gives us a very good guess.
And what is that?
Well, the Torah in the two times where it has the curses in the Torah, in the middle of Deuteronomy, at the end of Leviticus, and it goes on. If you read it, your eyes will pop out. It describes this atrocities that will happen to the Jews if they abandon their responsibility as being the moral guardians of the world. And they abandon Torah, and they abandon God, and they abandon their mission. And it says it clearly. You read it, and you say that this is the Holocaust. And it describes slaughter, hunger, famine, disease. To every form.
Throughout the whole,
and it's happened again and again.
The Holocaust was not new.
Well, the Holocaust was the grandest scale. And the Holocaust actually contributed to the migration of Jews, of Jewish life from Europe to the United States and Israel. And you read those sessions and you say, this was all foretold. This is the Holocaust. This is the Inquisition. These are the pogroms. These are the expulsions.
Well, you can also look at what's happening in Europe now, and anti-Semitism is certainly on the rise. I read an article yesterday that Mein Kampf is one of the best books
Yeah, the ebooks. I
selling
saw that. Yeah,
on Amazon. I was horrified.
I saw that as well. Like the
Mein Kampf, Hitler's book. His little minions have not ceased to exist at all, but they have, however, gained in great popularity, and it is the young people that are tagging onto it.
and if someone
Fascinating. It's fascinating.
and if
stuff.
someone thinks that this cannot happen, or
You were
in America, well, then you probably would
fail
not,
to appreciate,
or you would probably not be convinced that it could have happened in Germany if I told you this 100 years ago. Someone told you 100 years ago, the year 1913, that Germany of all places would be the ones who would have systematic genocide of the Jews and try to kill every Jew in Europe.
it would have been unheard of in 19.
No one would have believed you. But you know, we say that. But like I said, it's a very educated guess to say, hey, the beginning of the downfall of Jewish vibrancy was in Germany, because that's when the assimilation started. And that's why we know 250,000 Jews in the 19th century converted to Christianity, abandoned their religion. And there was wholesale abandonment as it was on the heels of the Enlightenment. Jews were granted citizenship to every country in Europe. Jews were allowed to integrate into society after being marginalized for hundreds of years.
Own property.
Own property and own businesses and go to universities. And a lot of Jews said, we're out. We're out. And it took 90 years for the Gentiles to say, no, you're not out. You're back in. And that's very unpleasant. But like we said, anti-Semitism is a way to ensure that the Jews will remain distinct as a nation. And there's two ways we can remain distinct as a nation. Either if we're a light into the nations and we're the model of what society should be, and everyone looks at us for direction, and we're distinct, and we have a Torah, and we have instructions, and we have morals, and we're the people with the highest moral code, right? We're the most intelligent, we're driven, we're changing the world. That's one way for Jewish exceptionalism, right? We can either be distinct and exceptional because of what we do, or if we decide that we want to be like the Goyim, like the Gentiles, well, it might take 90 years, but the Gentiles will say, no, you're distinct. Let's put you in a gas chamber. And as horrifying as it is to hear that, and as sad and, and I personally, like I have my grandparents, all four of them, and my wife's grandfather, like he should live well, he's 94 years old. He had 9 siblings. Every single one of them was slaughtered. His parents, his cousins, his neighbors, everyone, his whole town. He was in a different place. He was able to survive. Out of my family and my wife's family, we have the 6 grandparents who went through Auschwitz. Like, this is very real to me. And some of these people were very righteous people. But, sometimes the Jews are judged as a nation and as a single nation. And sometimes, people who are innocent, people who are quite righteous, people who, stand up for Jewish causes and Jewish values and Jewish practice, and they go down because, we succeed as a family and we die as a family. We look at the Jewish people as being a family. And we say that if someone else does something wrong, I have a little slice of that as well.
Well, usually what you see in another person is also what you see in yourself that sometimes is the most unpleasant.
Yeah. So, it's very unsettling, and it's something that we really, emotionally, there's no way we could actually relate to it. The only way we could do it is philosophically and intellectually, and we read the Torah. And the Torah, God means business. And God was there in the Holocaust. He was there. Everyone says, where was God? He was there. There's no way it could have happened otherwise. And
The question then becomes, what do we do with it?
And we have to know, as we're promised in the Torah, that the only way we're going to remain distinct, and it's just our choice as to how that's going to play out, either because of us or despite of us.
Is it Margaret Mead, the lady who quoted the phrase, never underestimate what a small group of people can do to change the world, because indeed it's the only thing that ever has. Or something to that effect. We all can change the world. We do it by showing up. Exactly.
100%. And you know what? Statistically, Jews are overrepresented in every metric of accomplishment. Jews are overrepresented because we're the Jewish people, and we're the chosen people, and we're God's people, and therefore we're treated, much more severe. There's no way that we could disappear as a nation, and God promises you're going to remain an eternal nation. And that can mean one of two things. That can mean either you'll follow the instructions of the Torah, you'll be the light unto the nation, you'll be distinct as a result of your actions, or Holocaust will happen. The Torah says it. You read the book. The Torah says it. It's emotionally something which is impossible to accept, but philosophically, intellectually, it's there.
The way I kind of help make reason of it is, it's almost like sports. And sometimes I think people look to God as the referee to make the call, whenever God and the teachings are more like the NBA. They're more the association. Prophets and some people sometimes are maybe more like the referees, good calls, bad calls, or something like that. But we as humans always want to blame the ref rather than, and we call it, the ref would be called God, rather than saying, oh, the NBA made a choice, they made a decision, and this is the way they decided. So it affects everybody underneath it. Does that kind of make sense? So if you elevate the call, to saying, why does God do good things and bad things? That's like a ref making good or bad calls. That's not God. That's more like enforcement. Whereas the higher level would be the association.
If that works for you, then great. I look at it as it being there's rules.
Right.
There's rules, and those rules are outlined in the Torah, and those rules aren't always pleasant. So we didn't actually get to anything I had planned to talk about today.
We'll consider today the Q&A class. And then we'll start with your set curriculum next week.
Yes, let's try to recap everything we talked about today. We talked about miracles, the individual miracles, the hidden miracles and the revealed miracles, and under what situations does God actually do revealed miracles. We spoke about the formation of the nation, why it's unique, why Judaism is unique, in that our narrative of the formation of our nation is different than every other nation and the formation of every other nation. We obviously talked about the Holocaust and God intervening and God giving people the free reign to have free will, to make decisions that impact themselves and the surrounding people either positively or negatively. At the beginning, we talked about, what was the first question that came up? I remember. 603,000. Oh yes. Logistics of how the Jews actually left Egypt, how they were navigating, what was the purpose of these 40 years as being a transition period from the supernatural to the to living in a natural setting. The idea of people being recreated. Remember that idea that God's constantly infusing us with life, and hence I could move a great distance if God just a second later recreates me somewhere else. That can happen, and I'm sure there were other things, but I don't remember. Did all Jews leave Egypt? So last week's parsha, the first set of verses, it says that the Jewish people left. V'chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. Chamushim. So if you look at Rashi brings two translations for the word chamushim. The word chamushim can mean they were armed. Jews were armed. And the second translation can mean the Jews. Chamushim is from the Hebrew word chamesh. What does the word chamesh mean? It's 5. It means that 1/5 of the Jews left. So according to the Midrash, there were actually 4/5, 80% of the Jews actually died in Egypt. Yeah.
Died meaning
That mean died.
death?
Huh?
They just lived out the rest of their natural life.
No, died. It says that they died during the plague of darkness, so that way the Egyptians cannot, because it was dark and the Egyptians weren't exactly able to monitor what was going on around them, because we don't want the Egyptians to actually say, we killed or we were able to humble the Jewish people, so to speak. So yes, so that's that would be what you're referencing. Okay, so I'm looking forward to seeing everyone next week. I guess this was the question and answer series. But if you do have a question, I'll give you guys a workaround. If you actually do have a question, what you do is you email it to me beforehand. I'll slip it into the curriculum, and Dan will never know. He'll never know. He'll never know that was actually a question and answer. He'll just think that's just part of what I can't plan to talk about.
You know, if only 1/5 of the Jews actually left Egypt, then that makes
There's a lot of people.
the mixed multitude that did leave more significant.
Absolutely.
Because guiding and organizing and trying to get people to work together